Welcome to Blessed Man Meditations. My name is Andy. On this YouTube channel, you'll find various videos produced in an effort to defend historic Christianity from alternative viewpoints that skeptics and others bring. I hope you'll find value in my work in the video that you're about to watch. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I look forward to receiving your feedback. Today on Blessed Man Meditations, we begin a study of the book written by Paul Copan. The book is entitled, Is God a Moral Monster? Making Sense of the Old Testament God. Paul Copan got his PhD from Marquette University, and he is the Pledger Family Chair of Philosophy and Ethics at Palm Beach Atlantic University in Florida. He is an expert on topics such as this. He is the author or editor of over 20 apologetics and philosophy books and lives with his wife and 5 children in Florida. So today on Blessed Man Meditations, we're going to look at the introduction of Is God a Moral Monster? And so Copan says, tackling Old Testament ethics is a challenge as he begins his introduction. Besides a lot of territory to cover, the ancient Near East seems so strange and even otherworldly. We need a good bit of background discussion to help make better sense of this world and of certain Old Testament texts. Old Testament ethics is one hot topic, and it creates all kinds of reactions, from bewilderment and confusion to anger and outpourings of hostility. I've sensed the need for an accessible, less lengthy book on this topic. Though I've done scattered writing on Old Testament ethics in various books and articles, Copan he wanted not only to expand on these themes, but also to add a good deal of new material. Copan has done the scattered writing on Old Testament ethics. In this case, Copan is killing 2 birds with one stone, not only tackling a tough subject, but also using the new atheism movement as a springboard for discussion. As this book is supposed to be reasonably popular level, Copan started out with the goal of keeping endnotes to a minimum, but to no avail. Given the nature of this topic, Copan didn't want to appear to make claims without some scholarly justification. Along these lines, Copan's research carefully follows reputable scholars and Old Testament studies. A good number of them assume a high view of Scripture's authority. Other scholars that Copan consulted do not assume a high view of Scripture's authority. This book's perspective represents a broad, general agreement on the main issues that Copan covers. The Old Testament world and literature have their share of murkiness and mystery. So, while Copan might cite Scholar X and Scholar Y about this or that point in his book, an equally reputable Scholar Z may quibble with them and with Copan. Copan doesn't want to get sidetracked by detailing all the reasons, pro and con, taken by all sides concerning the various Old Testament ethics topics that Copan discusses. Copan's chief point is this. Copan's basing his work on thoughtful, credible scholarship that offers plausible, sober-minded explanations and angles that present helpful resolutions and responses to perplexing Old Testament ethics questions. Another key issue is the relevance of the Old Testament in today's world. Copan will mention at various points how the Old Testament applies or doesn't apply to Christians, although he can't go into a lot of detail. Unlike national Israel, God's people, the true and new Israel, are an interethnic church with a heavenly citizenship. This heavenly citizenship must be of earthly good, however. Christ's disciples are to live out God's kingdom values, being salt and light and doers of good. The Christian faith has this worldly implications. If it doesn't, it's not Christian. Rather, it's a detached Gnosticism that ignores culture and ultimately denies reality. God's people are no longer national ethnic Israel, whose homeland is in the Middle East. As the New Testament makes clear, the interethnic Christian community is the true circumcision in Christ, whose citizenship is heavenly, and who stand in a new relation to the Mosaic law. The law is a part of our heritage and self-understanding, even if a good deal of it doesn't directly apply to the people of God today. Others have ably shown how the Old Testament should impact Christians. Christopher Wright, William Webb, John Goldingay, Gordon Wenham, Richard Hess, and others. So throughout this book, Copan will refer readers to the writings of the just mentioned scholars and their insights as well. So Copan hopes and prays that this book will address a vital need in the Christian community, which is often perplexed and sometimes immobilized by these difficult Old Testament texts. In order to facilitate the digestion process of the material brought forth in this book, Copan has included in the back of the book, if you get your own copy, that is, a study guide for small group discussion in adult Sunday school classes, Bible study groups, and university campus group. Copan goes on to thank Richard Hess, Richard Davidson, Trumper Longman, Jerome Walsh, Daniel Hayes, John Golding J. for their comments. He's grateful for their remarkable Christian charity, and they helped him come up with the content for this book. Thanks to Barna Maggie Rossi for furnishing a copy of the dissertation on Holy War. And he goes on to thank his colleague Nathan Lane and his editor Bob Hossack. And he finishes out thanking out Bob Hossack, Wendy Wetzel, and his supportive wife and children. So then part 1 of Is God a Moral Monster is Neo-Atheism. And chapter 1 of part 1 asks the question, who are the new atheists? In February 2007, Copan was one of several plenary speakers at the Greer Herd Forum, an annual conference held in New Orleans. This year's topic was the future of atheism. One featured speaker on the Orthodox Christian side was British theologian Alistair McGrath. The other far from Orthodox speaker was Daniel Dennett, a naturalistic evolutionist and philosopher of mind from Tufts University. This was the first opportunity Copan had to meet one of the new atheists. Copan and his wife enjoyed chatting with Dan at meals, and as his room right across the hall from the Copans interacted with Daniel Dennett during their comings and goings over the weekend. Dan Dennett is a witty, engaging conversationalist with pleasant life-of-the-party demeanor. His Santa-like face and beard only add to the conviviality. As a new atheist, Dan's one of several God deniers who write best-selling works these days. Some have called him one of the Four Horsemen, included among the likes of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens. Those four horsemen make up the neo-atheist apocalypse. So what is so new about new atheism? Hasn't atheism been around from ancient times? Yes, it has. For example, pleasure-promoting Epicurus and his later admirer Lucretius were materialists. That is, they believed that matter is all that there is. If deities exist, so say the materialists, deities are irrelevant. When you die, that's it, over and out. In more recent history, we've had newer atheists across the modern and contemporary philosophical landscape. From Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, John Paul Sartre, Bertrand Russell to Thomas Nagel, from John Searle, Keith Parsons, Graham Oppy, and William Rowe. Atheism certainly alive and kicking. As we'll see, the new atheist ad, shall we say, spice to the God discussion. So let's look at the new face of atheism. In the eyes of many, the Christian faith has an image problem. Many unchurched persons have been turned off to Christianity, though not necessarily to Jesus. Many unchurched persons don't like politicized religion in America, along with what they see as ample Christian arrogance, hypocrisy, judgmentalism, and disconnectedness from the real world. The perceptions of church outsiders are obviously not accurate, but they can provide an illuminating corrective to help professing Christians to properly align themselves with Jesus, their master. Due in large part to the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the Pentagon and Twin Towers, the new atheists have capitalized on evil done in the name of religion to tar all things religious with the same brush, including Christianity. Of course, religion is notoriously difficult to define, but the new atheists aren't into making nuanced distinctions here. Neo-atheists are riding the crest of this new wave, capitalizing on the West's increasingly post-Christian status. The current tide of emboldened opposition to the Christian faith lumps Christianity into the same category as radical Islam. Neo-atheists are the new public popular faith of atheism, a topic no longer seemingly limited to ivory tower academics. Not that the new atheists have convinced everyone. According to the eminent sociologist Rodney Stark, the new atheists are making a big media splash and have had several bestsellers to their credit. Many have interpreted this as a sign that multitudes of Americans are ready to renounce God publicly. But for most people, saying they have no religion just means they have no church, not that they're irreligious. The number of atheists in America in recent history has remained fairly consistent. According to Gallup polls, 4% of Americans were atheists back in 2007, the same percentage as in 1944. Rumors of God's death have been greatly exaggerated. And when we look at the non-Western world, people are becoming Christians in record numbers. The Christian faith is the fastest growing movement around, often accompanied by signs and wonders, as Penn State historian Philip Jenkins has ably documented. Whether from atheists or theists, we're seeing something of an all-around consensus about the neo-atheist arguments. For all their emphasis on cool-headed scientific rationality, they express themselves not just passionately but angrily. Rodney Stark describes them as angry and remarkably nasty atheists. Christian thinker Michael Novak, author of the thought-provoking book No One Sees God, comments about the neo-atheist writings that there's an odd defensiveness about all these books, as though they were not a sign of victory, but of desperation. Dennett tends to be more measured in his criticism of religion. He thinks the jury's still out on whether religion's benefits outweigh its deficits, unlike the other new atheists who insist that religion without exception is downright dangerous. But even so, Dennett doesn't always fairly engage the opposition by his selective quoting, and Dennett has bestowed the name Brights on the atheistically minded with a not-so-flattering implication for theists. The new atheists are right to point out that manifestations of ignorance, immorality, and hypocrisy characterize professing religious believers of all stripes. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 23, Jesus himself warned about morally bankrupt false prophets. They wear sheep's clothing to cover their wolf-like interior. They do outwardly pious acts, but are ultimately to be judged by evildoers, or to be judged as evildoers. This is tragic, though anticipated by Jesus and the lot of New Testament authors. And of course, the discerning person will recognize that Jesus shouldn't be blamed because of the abuses of his professed followers. So, second, the neo-atheists' arguments against God's existence are surprisingly flimsy, often resembling the simplistic village atheist far more than the credentialed academician. The neo-atheists are often profoundly ignorant of what they criticize, and they typically receive the greatest laughs and cheers from the philosophically and theologically challenged. True, they effectively utilize a combination of emotion and verbal rhetoric, but they aren't known for logically carrying thoughts from beginning to end. Their arguments against God's existence aren't intellectually rigorous, although they want to give that impression. Yes, they'll raise some important questions concerning, for example, the problem of evil, but again, their arguments are a collage of rhetorical barbs that don't really form a coherent argument. I've observed that while these men do have expertise in certain fields, such as biology and evolutionary theory in the case of Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, they turn out to be fairly disappointing when arguing God's existence or Christian doctrine. And a quick check of Dawkins' documentation reveals a lot more time spent on Google than at Oxford University Bodleian Library. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges is the author of I Don't Believe in Atheists, and certainly no friend of conservative Christians. He chastises Sam Harris for his facile attack on a form of religious belief we all hate, and his childish simplicity and ignorance of world affairs. The Christian can rightly join Hedges and the new atheists discuss it, the chauvinism, intolerance, and intellectualism and self-righteousness of religious fundamentalists without buying into their arguments. Rodney Stark puts it this way, quote, to expect to learn anything important about theological problems from Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett is like expecting to learn medieval history from someone who had only read Robin Hood. I guess that's the end of the quote. Yes, it's easy to attack a caricature with emotionalism and simplistic slogans. So with the new atheists going village on us, this makes it to have a decent conversation. What has amazed Copan is that so many have been intellectually swindled by such fallacious argumentation and blustery rhetoric. Don't just take it from Copan. Atheist philosopher of science Michael Roos says Dawkins' arguments are so bad that Roos is embarrassed to call himself an atheist. Terry Eagleton, an English literature and cultural theory professor, severely criticizes Ditchkins, his composite name for Dawkins and Hitchens. He considers them to be both out of their depth and misrepresenters of the Christian faith. They invariably, this is Terry Eagleton, he says that Ditchkins invariably come up with vulgar caricatures of religious religion, the more ill-informed their criticisms of it tend to be. In a book Copan co-edited with fellow philosopher William Lane Craig, he wrote an essay called Dawkins' Delusion, which responds to Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. William Lane Craig, he's a great Christian apologist. Perhaps one day I'll go through Reasonable Faith, his book on this channel. Craig does his best to piece together Dawkins' arguments against God's existence, which is really embarrassingly weak. At the end of his essay, William Lane Craig writes, quote, "Several years ago, my atheist colleague Quentin Smith unceremoniously crowned Stephen Hawking's argument against God in a brief history of time as the worst atheistic argument in the history of Western thought. With the advent of the God delusion, the time has come, I think, to relieve Hawking of that weighty crown and to recognize Dawkins' ascension to the throne," end quote. Third, the new atheists aren't willing to own up to atrocities committed in the name of atheism. Yeah, this is a really good point, because one of the big new atheist arguments is to say, boy, in the name of religion, a lot of horrific things were done. Well, here's point number 3. The new atheists aren't willing to own up. The new atheists who want the Christians to own up to the atrocities done in the name of God, in the name of Christianity, as found in the Old Testament. But these same new atheists aren't willing to own up to atrocities committed in the name of atheism by Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, yet they expect Christians to own up to the stuff in the Old Testament and, as this says, the stuff performed in Jesus' name by contemporary followers of Christ. In one debate, Dennett refused to connect Stalin's brutality and inhumanity with his hardcore atheism. In fact, he claimed Stalin was a kind of religious figure. In September 2009, Copan attended a debate between Hitchens and Dinesh D'Souza in Orlando. Hitchens refused to admit that Stalin killed in the name of atheism. Somehow Stalin, who had once attended a Russian Orthodox seminary but later came to convincingly repudiate Christianity, was still religious after all. Yet Hitchens insisted that a religious residue still stayed with him. Yet in another debate, Hitchens was pressed to make the seemingly rare confession, "It has to be said," quote, by Hitchens, "that some of my non-believing forebears seized the opportunity to behave in the same way as a moral religious person's sure." Yes. So there's Hitchens admitting that even non-religious people can behave in immoral ways. Copan thinks the reason is difficult, not impossible, for these new atheists to acknowledge immorality in the name of atheism is because it would take the wind out of their sails when criticizing religion. Right? Yeah. If they have to, if the new atheists have to admit that atheists are committing moral atrocities too, then they won't be able to criticize the Christians as strongly for the quote unquote atrocities that they see committed in the name of religion. If we'd stop to ask would Jesus approve of the Inquisition or of persecuting Jews, the question answers itself. As a counter illustration, what about serial murderer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer? Dahmer reasoned, if it all happened naturalistically, what's the need for a God? Can't I set my own rules? Who owns me? I own myself. He wondered, if there's no God and we all just came from the slime, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? Yeah, that's the even though an atheist will admit that there is, many atheists will admit that there is true objective morality and that certain things are objectively wrong or are objectively right, they have a hard time defining what it is. And then they'll say, well, you can't say that God is the source of good because God is the one who commanded the genocides and all of these other things. But we're going to talk about those things as we go through this book. So the reverse side of this coin is that the new atheist refusal or great reluctance to acknowledge the profound or well-documented positive influence of Christian faith in the world. Yeah, they will not, the new atheists will not acknowledge all the good that Christians do. The list of contributors includes preserving literature, advancing education, laying the foundations of modern science, cultivating art and music, promoting human rights, and providing better working conditions for persons, and overthrowing slavery. Another atheistic objection to the God of the Bible is that the God of the Bible promoted slavery. Well, as we'll see, that's not accurate. And as Copan says here, the New Testament overthrew slavery. So a lot of the attacks that the new atheists make on the God of the Bible are caricatures and straw men, and they seek to make emotional arguments that lack facts, and they want to get people to emotionally connect with them so that they will make the same mistake that they've made. Contributions are acknowledged by atheists and theists alike. For the new atheists, religion poisons everything, but atheism poisons nothing. So the new atheists say. But Copan will come back to this later. But for now, Copan's just registering his complaint. So there's one unaddressed area. Despite the strong intellectual response to New Atheism, one area left unaddressed is that of Old Testament ethics. In some ways, this topic is probably most deserving of our attention and clarification. The New Atheists commonly raise questions about strange and harsh Old Testament laws, a God of jealousy and anger, slavery, and the killing of the Canaanites, and that's just the beginning of the list. Not only this, but they're usually just as simplistic and uninformed here as in their general attacks on religion. As Copan has done some writing in this area, Copan wanted to use the New Atheist critiques as a springboard to clarify and iron out misunderstandings and misrepresentations. It's not an easy area to cover, as the ancient Near East is a world that often seems so bizarre to us. As we explore some of the main criticisms of Old Testament ethics, we can't cover them all here. We'll gain a new appreciation for what's going on in the Old Testament, especially when we compare it to other ancient Near Eastern cultures. And that is the end of the first chapter of Is God a Moral Monster? Next time, we will look at chapter 2, which is an introduction to the New Atheists and the Old Testament God. So, thank you for tuning in to the first video in the series through Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? Making Sense of the Old Testament God. So, again, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. On previous videos, you will have seen that there's a published work available by me. It's a volume on the first 30 chapters of the Book of Psalms. It's entitled Pinnacles and Plateaus, Meditations with the Psalmist. I will probably put a picture of it when this video ends. So please consider supporting this ministry by purchasing my published work. And thanks again for watching, and have a blessed rest of your day.